Hi, it's Bonnie here with So Inspired by Bonnie with another Tuesday's tip. Hope everyone's having a great Tuesday. What I'd like to discuss today would be thread shredding. We all run into that issue from time to time, and I just want to empower you with some tips on how to find solutions to that problem. So let's go ahead and get started. I made a cheat sheet for myself to go over of some different ideas of what might cause thread shredding so that you can kind of do a little bit of detective work and see if you can find the solution yourself. Because if you're like me, sometimes burning the midnight oil, you don't have time to take your machine in to get repaired or looked at just because you're having some issues with the thread shredding. So the first thing I do if I'm running into some thread shredding issues is I'll look at the needle itself. Does it have a burr on it? Has it been worn out? Have I used it for more than 8 hours? Sometimes we can cause a burr just by inserting the needle, just in the process, I should say, of inserting the needle into the machine. We might accidentally bump the tip against the throat plate or something of that nature. So keep that in mind, that even if you've just pulled that brand new needle out of the package, one, sometimes we get a bad needle straight out of the package. Two, sometimes we accidentally cause a burr to happen on the needle by inserting it into the machine by bumping it somehow. So keep that in mind. Also, I want to make sure that I have the correct size of needle for the project I'm doing. Oftentimes I sew a lot of different types of projects. I'm sewing on a lot of different types of fabrics, and you might be too. So we use different needles for different projects. When you think about it, the needle has a couple of purposes. It's one of the main purposes of the needle is, well, obviously to make a stitch, but you want the needle to make the smallest hole it can make in your fabric and still accommodate the thread through the eye of the needle without the thread shredding. So it needs to make a teeny tiny hole in your fabric if possible, and it needs to have this thread that has its own density go through the eye of the needle. So you want to make sure that you have the right size needle for the project you're using. And a cool way to test that, I most often than not use an 1175 needle for almost all my embroidery. A lot of people will always use an 8012. Both sizes are pretty common. I just like the 7511 because it's a little bit smaller and it still doesn't give me any issues. And what I like to do to test it to make sure that I've got the right size needle for my thread is I'll take the needle out of the machine and I will thread the needle like that, and I have it on about 2 or 3 feet of thread. It's not anything perfect science here. And I'll take the thread and the needle and I will rock it back and forth with my hands. And if the needle slides up and down on that thread without any glitches or hang-ups, I know I've got the right size needle for my project and my thread. So if you're using a 40 weight embroidery thread, an 1175 needle is going to work. I use an 1175 embroidery needle. Or an 8012 is going to work. Also, if you happen to run out of those, maybe you broke a needle and again you're burning the midnight oil, you can use a top stitch needle in place of an embroidery needle in a pinch. So the top stitch needles have a bigger eye on them, so I happen to have some 9014s. I could use that in a pinch. I would prefer to use an 8012 top stitch needle in a pinch. But they are here and they are available, so you can use a top stitch needle instead of an embroidery needle if you needed to. On a cotton thread, I tested it and it worked fine, but depending upon the weight of the cotton thread, you might want to go up to say a 9014. But either an embroidery needle or a top stitch needle will work great for your embroidery threads. You're going at a higher speed with embroidery, so sometimes you just need a little bit of extra room on that eye of the needle. Another thing to think about, excuse me, is the color of thread you're using black or navy? Traditionally, black and navy thread is the weakest thread out there. No matter who's making it, no matter what brand, black or navy is going to be your weakest thread because of the dyeing process. It has to go through the dyeing process many more times than, say, white would have to go through. If that's the case, you have a couple of options. You can try a trick that I've not had to personally try myself, but my dealer swore by it, so I trust her judgment. She would take the thread, put it in a plastic Ziploc bag with the bag still open, and put it in the freezer. The freezer would reintroduce the moisture that had been dried out of her thread, and she was able to use it again. I've heard of different people that had bought cheap thread, or their thread had dried out, you know, being exposed to light and air. I'm in a humid climate, but I run the heater all year long, so I run the risk of my thread drying out. If I was having issues with the thread shredding and I thought it was dry, I would put it in a Ziploc bag and toss it in the freezer for a few hours to see if that solved my problem. If it did not solve my problem, you might just have a bad spool of thread and you might just need to toss it and use a different spool of thread. It's a lot cheaper than taking it in your machine in, I should say, for a repair. Specialty fabrics. Are you sewing on a specialty fabric? Sometimes a specialty fabric can be causing issues with your thread and causing it to shred. A case in point, years ago I was sewing this costume. It's a skating outfit and the top is all sequins. And this fabric was giving me all kinds of heck sewing it out. I'd go 1 or 2 inches. If you can look up close, you can see those are all sequins. There's no holes in them. They're not sewn on. They're glued on. And it gave me fits sewing that costume because every 2 or 3 inches it would shred and it would break. And so I thought, I'm never going to get through this project. I'm never going to get it sewed. And my trusty dealer said, try this. Try some silicone spray on that project. So what you do with silicone spray is, I'm going to hold this up, is you take the silicone spray, your fabric, you know, you just have the fabric, you don't have a completed project obviously, and you just spray straight onto the fabric. I know that seems weird, but it does not harm your fabric whatsoever. That's why I wanted you to see by my spraying that finished garment. It's not going to harm your fabrics. And what it does is it lubricates the fabric so that every time the needle goes through the fabric, it gets lubricated and it comes up and it gets lubricated. So it's nice and slick. The thread doesn't have any issues because it's not trying to work with that gummy glue and get all gummed up. It's just really nice and smooth, and it works fabulous. It's sewed like butter after I use the silicone spray. So if you're having trouble with a specialty fabric, there's another tip if you're having thread issues. Sticky stabilizer. Now that we're on to the glues, sticky stabilizer. Sometimes you might have an old roll of sticky stabilizer. It might not be the best brand of sticky stabilizer. Some sticky stabilizers will gum up your needle and cause the thread to shred. You have 2 options with that. One, you can try the silicone spray right on top and see if you can get yourself through that project with the sticky stabilizer that's giving you issues. Or you can toss the sticky stabilizer and try a different brand and see if you can get one that does not gum up your needles. Spray adhesives is another kind of glue. It's a temporary spray adhesive. It's used just to get your project from the hooping area to your machine without everything falling out of the hoop. That's the purpose of a spray adhesive. So when you use a spray adhesive, you don't want to use too much. You want to use it extremely lightly, just a couple of light little spritzes, and that's it. You don't want to hold down and spray really heavy. If you spray really, really heavily, or even sometimes medium heavy, you will get your needle to gum up, and then you'll get the thread to shred. So keep that in mind when you're using spray adhesive, to just use a really light spray and you should be good to go. Threads stuck in the tension disc. Sometimes we get threads stuck in a tension disc. A good way to resolve that issue is to take good old dental floss, not the waxed kind. You want just plain dental floss, and slide that on through your tension discs. A lot of times that'll clean out that area, get rid of the fuzzies, and your thread will have a nice slick surface to go through instead of one where it's fighting against other materials that are in there. So make sure that your tension discs are clean by, taking some floss and just running it through your machine. Again, don't use waxed floss. It needs to be just the plain floss. Sewer's Aid. I know some people swear by Sewer's Aid. I'm a little bit leery of the Sewer's Aid personally, and I know that's just a personal opinion. And the reason being is I know my dealer at one time said that the Sewer's Aid is not recommended for all brands of machines. So if you do use Sewer's Aid, and I know some people swear by it, say it's really, really good, make sure that it's okay to use on your particular brand of machine. So check with your dealer first on that. I was always afraid. I used to use Fray Check, and I was always afraid that I would get my Sewer's Aid and my Fray Check mixed up, and oh my goodness, that would be a mess if I did. So that's why I personally stayed away from Sewer's Aid. But I don't want to discourage you from trying it, because I know a lot of people just really love it. Again, please check with your dealer to make sure that it's safe to use on your machine. Specialty threads, glow-in-the-dark thread, metallic thread. Something I like to do to prevent thread shredding with those. Now I use a metallic thread from the embroidery store. You can Google them. That's all they're called, is the embroidery store. They have wonderful metallic thread that's reasonably priced. I never have any issues. If you don't have a thread stand that's built into your machine, I highly recommend getting a thread stand. Make sure that you keep it away from your hand wheel so that the threads don't accidentally get stuck in your hand wheel. But I like to, when I'm using specialty threads, I like to move it about 2 to 3 feet away from my machine and let it come into and then thread my machine normally. And the reason I do that is it gives a little more distance between where it's coming off of, the thread that is, and it getting to the eye of the needle. It gives it more time to untwist if the thread has a tendency to twist on you. When it twists, it can get kinks in it, and then again, it can wear out going through the eye of the needle because it's kinked up, making it thicker, and you'll get shreds. So a thread stand has alleviated a lot of issues I've had with some specialty threads, such as the glow-in-the-dark thread or some metallic, some of the hologram tinsel kind of thread that I've used. Last but not least, one of the more common problems with thread shredding is you actually have a burr somewhere along the thread path of your machine, or on the bobbin race. Maybe you broke a needle and had a hole go through it, or the throat plate, maybe again you broke a needle or bent a needle and it hit the throat plate and caused a burr. Now, one way to check, and I didn't even know this, that I had a bad little problem on this bobbin race until I was preparing this little live video this morning. But one quick and easy way to check is take a cotton ball and slide it along your bobbin race, and if you feel a rough spot, you probably have a little hole there. So I was doing that this morning, and I discovered I had not one, but like 4 little holes right in a row here where my needle went right through my bobbin race several times. I'm going to point to it, and hopefully you can see it. It's right there where my fingernail is pointing. There's several little holes right in a row. as opposed to this bobbin race. Let me turn it the same way, excuse me. If you can see, this one's good. There's no holes in this one, and this one has several right there in a hole. And you'll see them on the back. Again, if you take a cotton ball and rub it across it, you'll feel where it sticks. The solution to that, you have two solutions. You could just go in and buy a new one, or you can come in here, and I like to take an emery board. This is just a nail file, also known as an emery board, and I like to use the buffer side, which is the finest that they have. Very, very fine. And you can come in here and just file it down where those little rough spots are, and file it on the front too where those rough spots are. And you want to file it just until it's nice and smooth, where you don't have the hole where it pushed the bobbin race out to create the hole, the needle creating the hole. So you can take a nail file and file it down. If you discover a little nick on your throat plate, excuse me, you can do the same thing. You can take a little file and kind of smooth it out and make sure that you don't have a rough spot right there. Excuse me. Another thing is, if you did break a needle, or maybe you didn't, double check your the foot that you're using. Make sure there's no burrs on that foot as well. Any burr along the machine and any burr along the foot will cause the thread to shred. If you've done all these tips, if you've checked everything imaginable and you still have thread issues, it could be that there's a little burr along the thread path inside the machine that we can't really get to. And then your only solution really is to take it to the dealer and have them look at it and make sure that there's no burrs that the thread is hanging up on. I hope these tips have helped you, and until next Tuesday, I will, don't want to forget, I will look at all the comments. So if you have any comments or questions, please let me know, because I do look at all the comments and questions, and I will answer them and address any concerns that you may have and give you my opinions, what might be your best solution for the issue that you're running into. So again, if you have any questions, just let me know. I'm here to help, and I will see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye for now. Have a good week.